beanbag luxury. I've done top 5 lists for 2023. I don't know whether this will come out first, second or third, but there'll be 3 lists altogether. Top 5 reads of 2023, top 5 manga of 2023, and top 5 worst reads of 2023. Now, unlike those first 2 categories, I'm going to be lumping the 2 together for this list, because truth be told, I haven't read too many terrible books, really. It goes without saying that my terrible may be your perfection. Everyone's opinion is different, and this is very much part of my opinion, which the whole channel is anyway. So yeah, we'll get underway. This is in numerical order, like the other lists. So top 5 worst reads of 2023. The first one, number 5, is the only one I still have on my bookshelves, which tells you some things, definitely. Vinland Saga, Volume 13, or Book 13. One of my favourite series of all time. How has a volume of that appeared on this list? Well, I will tell you. I will tell you. Because ultimately, this took ages to come out. And I've been waiting patiently for kind of Book 13 of the series to continue our journey forward, this time kind of making it to the shores of Vinland and progressing the story to its end, really. There's only a couple of volumes, a couple of books left. Volume 12 that preceded it was okay. It was fine, but it was certainly the weaker of the series so far. And this kind of continued that downward trend. But unlike Book 12, this really didn't have a great deal going for it, I thought. A lot of nothing happened, nothing really significant for the characters, really pushed things forward. There was little to kind of no high drama and action that you've come to expect from the series. And so it's here because it disappointed me more than any other book that I read in 2023. So I'm not saying it's a terrible read or a bad read, but I certainly was left with more disappointment than any other book that I've read with this one, because the bar is so significantly high. Honestly, if you haven't read Vinland Saga, it's astounding. And hopefully this is just kind of one of those books where once you read the story overall, it'll kind of slot in as a quieter chapter, but, you know, okay in the grand scheme of things. But it didn't really do much for me in the slightest, unfortunately. The next book is another Viking drama called The Exile, and it's published by Living the Line. The Exile, I read and I was thoroughly enjoying it. It was a really grounded Viking tale following a guy who had basically been exiled for committing various crimes on his island, in his community, and he was exiled for a certain number of years, and then he returned back. He returned back and his father had passed away and certain lands had been given over to other relatives, and he had changed drastically. Warfare and other places and various experiences changed him fundamentally as a person, really. But coming back to the community hadn't really evolved or changed at all. They still had the same amount of animosity towards the things he did. They still hated him in the ways they did before he left, for what he did and all that. And so the community kind of stayed still while he changed, and I suppose expected in some way to have a bit of a hero's welcome, but it was nothing like that in the slightest, really. What struck me about this book more than anything is it was a really grounded take on that whole genre. Normally that whole genre kind of gets swallowed up with really over-the-top action and really over-the-top kind of, you know, battles and characters, but everything was quite downplayed, quite realistic, quite stripped back, and it had a very human feel to it. It felt like real history. It felt like a real tale from the past, really. Ultimately, the moment that the book changed for me was the moment a plot device was introduced, and it just ruined the whole thing for me, essentially. What happened is there was this kind of shamanistic witch-like character in the story who was kind of almost, you know, hinting towards another female character that she could use witchcraft to get revenge, because she was a very embittered woman towards this main character, really, that had come back. But because the book was so grounded in realism, you never really give it credit for actually taking place or actually being realistic in any way. You kind of just thought, oh, that's just them being, you know, overly kind of religious and superstitious. And then she basically gets all these ingredients to create a doll, and then at a pivotal point in the story, she stabs this doll, and it works, and the main character's whole kind of progression and ending alters because of this one thing. And I was just like, for a book that's steeped in realism and has all that behind it, that's just, sometimes it's just one thing that changes a book for me, and that was that one thing that changed that book for me. It's very similar to Berserk. Berserk, I read 11 volumes of the deluxe volumes of Berserk, and I really enjoyed much of it, even the kind of grotesque, gruesome, horrific scenes and stuff like that. But I couldn't get over what they did to Casca and how that character shifted and changed and was kind of treated there on in. And so every time I read it, that was just in the back of my mind, and it was just that one kind of thing that ruined the whole thing. And it was the same with The Exile, that use of magic coming out of totally left field, really, because there hadn't been much groundwork put in place for it, and there certainly wasn't any other examples of that type of witchcraft and wizardry and gods and stuff going on in the book. So it really came out of left field and ruined my experience a bit. The art was great throughout, and again, if it wasn't for that just one thing, it wouldn't be anywhere near this list. Next, Ode to Kitaro, so I think is how we pronounce it, an Osamu Tezuka book that I picked up because I've enjoyed a lot of his work, and this one was always seen as a bit more violent and depressing, much like his other one, which is called Mew, I think. This I started reading, and it started off really strongly. You're following a doctor who gets introduced to this virus who alters basically people to kind of dog-like form, and so they go through various symptoms and ailments, and then eventually they turn into a kind of almost canine-like form. And so, yeah, it was a really weird premise, but this doctor starts investigating, and he then begins to uncover the mysteries of this new virus, but also then his work gets stolen, his life gets stolen, he gets pushed into a different direction, he contracts the disease himself, and he starts a process of the book absolutely decimating this main character, ripping him apart piece by piece. It consistently pushed him into more deeper, depraved and horrible torture and mental abuse and all this type of thing. And people just taking advantage of his new dog-like form, people being astounded that he can talk in this form, and it just stripped him of his entire humanity. And I can kind of get what the book was going for. I can kind of get that it's stripping away a person's humanity, seeing what's left. And there's just so much badness in this book. There's not a lot to like about it. But that wasn't really it, because I've read books that had a lot of badness about them before, not a lot to like. But there was still a purpose and a reason. And I think if this book was a little smaller and stopped that relentless punishment at a certain point, that it would have kind of been okay. My main problem is that it kept going and going and going. And so the punishment and the mental anguish and torture and just horrific stuff he was being put through, honestly, the stuff this guy goes through is insane. It gets to the point where none of it actually matters, because, and I've got this problem with a few books like Monster by Barry Windsor Smith, is you push a person or a character so far and you get them to do so much depraved stuff that at some point, if you continue doing it, it doesn't keep forward in the character or the plot. It's just the norm. And that's what this book did. It kind of created a situation where the norm was every single page is abusing and belittling this main character right the way up until the end as well. And it was relentless. And I just read it just in the hope that it would shift at some point and actually be, quite uplifting and nice. But it doesn't. And so that's why you should. My next book is Night Fever by Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker. Now, a lot of people liked Night Fever by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Great team. And I love most of the stuff they do, to be honest. But this book was all over the place, I thought. The main character was a kind of 40-something middle-aged man who was working for a book firm, and he basically was going to a book fair, a book kind of festival where he was getting contracts and stuff like that. Now, he was having trouble sleeping, and he was kind of having like a midlife crisis, and when he got there, he started taking pills to help him sleep and to do other things. But he was instantly kind of plagued with a lot of bitterness getting off the plane, because he felt like people were, stealing his stories and stuff like that. He was an embittered kind of midlife crisis male working for a book firm. So you get all that quite early on. But then the stuff that he gets embroiled in is just ridiculous, I think, because, again, this guy is just, at home as a family man, a normal kind of guy. And within the course of, days, hours, he's now breaking loose. And I think fundamentally my problem with it wasn't the art, because Sean Phillips does a fine job, really. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. But it's the unbelievableness of the plot and the main character. I had no faith that this guy would actually do any of this. It's not even like Walter White from Breaking Bad, where he had cancer or stuff like that, and he totally flips out and loses his mind. This guy just hasn't slept. So, yeah, it just... the whole premise there didn't work for me, and I didn't kind of buy into it in the slightest, really. Number 1 is The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. Now, this is published by Living the Line and created by Dave Sim, but then finished by Living the Line artist. I've forgotten his name now. It's gone out of my head. I'll put it down here because it's totally gone out of my head now. This book I picked up because the artistry looked so spectacular and special, and I knew a little bit of history around Alex Raymond and the other kind of artists that the book was looking at. But I don't think I've ever read a more pretentious and accessible book in my life. It instantly assumes a lot of knowledge and appreciation. So it's definitely not for every person. It's definitely for people who love and have a deep passion for comic artistry and certainly photorealistic art and that type of thing. It's presented in a kind of almost abstract way, where he creates this fictional scene of a girl in a comic book shop reading the comic that you were reading, and then having different experiences, and you jumping into the comic and reading about the strange death of Alex Raymond, which is nothing to do with the strange death of Alex Raymond at all, really. It's just a pivoting point, really, because fundamentally what it's about comic artistry and the different kind of comic artists of that period that had such a gigantic influence. And Dave Sims is absolutely obsessed with telling you over and over about the metaphysicality of comics and comic artistry. Practically every single page had metaphysics or metaphysical on it, and it drove me mental. I literally had a game to myself when I was reading it. This is how frustrated I was. How many times does metaphysical appear on this page? And trust me, there weren't many pages that it didn't appear on. They really weren't, because it kept pushing that to the point where the story just became totally inaccessible, because it almost felt like it was in his head. The structure and the story kind of must have made sense to him writing it, but reading it and trying to absorb it and understand is almost impossible. I found it really is one of the most inaccessible reads I've ever read. I could not fully understand it. Even when I got to the end, I was like, I don't know, apart from the odd little tidbit about history and comic book history, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what the book was trying to do, trying to achieve, trying to be. It was very strange. And then the artistry, you would think, yeah, the artistry is great, it's fantastic, and it's really innovative. But then there's great swathes of pages that are literally direct copies of the original artwork. So him kind of experimenting and using the techniques that other photorealistic artists have put down, and him putting his own version of them, which are pretty much identical to the versions in the comics often. Even a lot of the artistry hasn't got that deep originality and creativity. Some of it has, but I finished it feeling like, well, I might as well have read Alex Raymond or all of these other cartoonists that he is kind of referenced, because I'm sure I would have enjoyed more and understood more about their craft by actually going through the proper thing, not reading this thing that purports metaphysicality in every other sentence. It really drove me mad, to be honest. But anyway, here's my top 5 worst reads of 2023. Hopefully 2024 won't have any. So thank you very much for watching. I will catch you on the next one.